In a small farming village in the Mantaro Valley of central Peru, roughly 2 hours by truck from the modern city of Huancayo, a fruit grows on small evergreen shrubs in nearly every household garden. The shrubs stand about 3 feet tall. Each one produces somewhere between 50 and 100 fruits per year, in continuous waves throughout the growing season, which in the Andean highlands runs essentially year-round. The fruits are cream-colored, roughly the size of a small mango, streaked with purple stripes that darken as the fruit ripens. The flavor, when fully ripe, combines honeydew melon and cantaloupe with a faint cucumber-fresh note and an aromatic perfume that fills the kitchen the moment a fruit is sliced open. The plant is a close cousin of tomato. Same botanical family, same continent of origin, same general growing requirements. It is a perennial shrub that produces continuously rather than seasonally, unlike tomato, which dies at the end of every season, must be replanted from seed each spring. It has been cultivated in this same valley since at least 500 years before the Inca Empire even existed. Spanish chroniclers documented it in detail in the 1550s. And outside of South America and a handful of specialty growers, almost nobody in the world has ever seen one. If you are new here, subscribe. To understand why pepino is missing from American grocery stores, you have to understand the history of Andean agriculture and the specific way Spanish colonization disrupted it. The plant's origin is unusual. Solanum muricatum is what botanists call a domesticate of unknown wild origin. No confirmed wild population of the exact species has ever been documented. The closest wild relatives, including Solanum caripense and Solanum tabanoense, grow across the highland forests of South America. But the cultivated pepino has been so thoroughly selected that its specific wild ancestor is lost to history. What we do know, from archaeological evidence, is that pepino cultivation predates the Inca Empire by at least 1,000 years. The Moche civilization of northern Peru, which flourished from roughly 100 AD to 800 AD, featured pepino fruits prominently in their ceramic art. Pottery vessels recovered from Moche archaeological sites include detailed sculptural representations of the fruit, oval shape, characteristic purple striping, realistic enough that modern botanists can identify the variety being depicted. The Nazca civilization of southern Peru, contemporaneous with the Moche, also depicted pepino in their textile and ceramic traditions. By the time the Inca Empire consolidated its power across the central Andes in the early 15th century, pepino was an established crop across multiple ecological zones, from coastal valleys at sea level to highland plateaus above 3,000 meters elevation. The plant was particularly valued in the coastal valleys of what is now northern Peru and southern Ecuador, where the Moche Valley itself produced pepino in such abundance that the fruit became culturally associated with that specific region. When Spanish forces under Francisco Pizarro arrived in the Andean highlands in 1532, they encountered an agricultural system that included pepino as one of dozens of established native crops, alongside potato, quinoa, amaranth, maize, otza, uluco, mashua, and several other Andean cultivars that had been refined over thousands of years of selective breeding. Spanish chroniclers documented pepino in considerable detail. The Jesuit naturalist Bernabe Cobo, writing in the early 17th century, described the fruit as resembling a small melon with sweet, juicy flesh and an aromatic fragrance. The Augustinian friar, Antonio de la Calancha, writing in 1638, included pepino in his catalog of South American foods, along with extensive notes on its cultivation methods. For roughly 200 years after Spanish contact, pepino remained a routinely cultivated South American crop. It traveled with Spanish ships back to Europe, where it was experimentally cultivated in royal botanical gardens. It was named botanically by the English botanist William Ayton in his 1789 catalog of plants cultivated at the royal gardens at Kew. The same William Ayton who named Yaupan holly in the same publication, using the same Latin naming conventions that have persisted to the present. Ayton called the species Solanum muricatum, literally meaning the bumpy nightshade, in reference to the slight texture of the fruit skin. This is where the story shifts. Subscribe if you want more of these stories. The plant that thrived for 2,000 years across pre-Columbian Andean agriculture proved unable to establish in European or North American commercial agriculture. The reasons are specific and worth understanding, because they explain almost every other forgotten crop on this channel. First, pepino does not transport well. The ripe fruit is highly aromatic, soft-fleshed, and has a relatively short shelf life of 1 to 3 weeks under refrigeration. For a Spanish ship returning to Europe in the 1600s, fresh pepino was essentially impossible to deliver. For a railroad-based commercial agriculture system emerging in the 1800s, the fruit was a constant logistics problem. Second, pepino does not reproduce reliably from seed. The plant is genetically variable, and seedlings from a single fruit will produce offspring with widely different fruit characteristics. In its native range, pepino is propagated almost exclusively by stem cuttings, which preserve the specific genetics of each established cultivar. A grower who wants to maintain consistent fruit quality must take cuttings, root them carefully, and establish new plants asexually. For a commercial agriculture system built around seed catalogs and standardized varieties, this was a serious obstacle. Third, Pepino requires frost-free conditions. The plant tolerates cool weather but cannot survive a hard freeze. This restricts true perennial cultivation to USDA hardiness zones 10 and 11, roughly the southern tip of Florida, coastal southern California, Hawaii, and parts of southern Texas and Arizona. Across most of the continental United States, Pepino can be grown only as an annual or as a greenhouse crop. Fourth, and most decisively, Pepino entered the European agricultural consciousness during the same era that tomato was establishing itself as the dominant New World fruit of European cuisine. Tomato grew from seed reliably. Tomato produced consistent fruit characteristics across multiple generations of seed reproduction. Tomato adapted to European climates through aggressive breeding programs that ran from the 1500s through the 1800s. Pepino did none of these things easily. The two plants were competing for the same European agricultural niche, fresh-eating Solanaceae fruit, and tomato won decisively. By the late 19th century, European interest in Pepino had largely faded. The fruit was still grown across South America in essentially the same patterns it had occupied for 2,000 years, but the global commercial agriculture system had effectively passed it over. What is unusual is what happened in the 1970s and 1980s. A research group at the Universidad Politécnica de Valencia in Spain, led by plant geneticists, including Jaime, Proens and Fernando Nuez, began systematic breeding work on Pepino in the early 1980s. The team developed improved cultivars, including varieties named Sweet Long, Sweet Round, and Valencia, that were more uniform, more productive, and better adapted to controlled greenhouse production. A parallel research program at Massey University in New Zealand in the same general period established Pepino as a small but viable commercial crop in that country. By the 1990s, Pepino was being exported in small quantities from New Zealand, Spain, and Chile to specialty markets in Japan, Europe, and North America. The fruit had not made a comeback, but it had survived its near disappearance and established a quiet foothold in modern specialty agriculture. The modern research on Pepino has accelerated significantly over the past 15 years. The 2024 review, published in the journal Molecules, which synthesized data from dozens of studies on the pharmacological effects of Solanum muricatum, documented a substantial profile of bioactive compounds in the fruit. The phenolic acid content includes caffeic acid, cinnamic acid, coumaric acid, ellagic acid, ferulic acid, and rosmarinic acid. The flavonoid content includes epicatechin, myricetin, naringenin, quercetin, and rutin. The carotenoid content, particularly in yellow-fleshed varieties, includes V-carotene and zeaxanthin, the same pigment compounds that give carrots and certain leafy greens their nutritional reputation. A 100-gram serving of fresh Pepino fruit provides approximately 22 calories, making Pepino one of the lowest-calorie fruits on the market. Approximately 92% water by weight. Notable vitamin C content, typically between 20 and 35 milligrams per 100 grams, which places Pepino in a similar range to fresh tomatoes on a per gram basis. Significant potassium, moderate amounts of vitamin A, small amounts of iron and calcium, and a substantial fiber profile including both soluble and insoluble fractions. The pharmacological research has documented several specific effects that researchers are now investigating in more depth. The most consistent area involves blood sugar regulation. Multiple cell culture and animal model studies have documented anti-diabetic activity attributed primarily to quercetin and other flavonoid compounds in the fruit. The mechanism appears to involve improved insulin sensitivity and reduced insulin resistance at the cellular level. This is preclinical research. It does not establish Pepino as a diabetes treatment, but the direction of the findings has been consistent enough that the 2024 Molecules review specifically identified Pepino as a candidate for further functional food research in the context of metabolic disorders. Beyond diabetes-related research, laboratory studies have documented antioxidant capacity, anti-inflammatory effects through cytokine modulation, and selective cytotoxicity against certain cancer cell lines in vitro testing. A 2016 study published in the journal Molecules examined extracts from Pepino and its wild relative Solanum caripense, locally called zimbolo, and documented phenolic compound profiles that compared favorably with several commercial fruits marketed for their antioxidant content. The hepatoprotective research is preliminary but consistent across multiple studies. Pepino leaf extracts have demonstrated protective effects in alcohol-induced liver damage models in laboratory animals. The mechanism appears to involve inhibition of inflammatory cytokines, specifically TNF-alpha and IL-6, that drive the progressive liver damage associated with chronic alcohol exposure. This is animal model research. It does not establish Pepino as a liver treatment for human use. but the convergence of findings across multiple research areas suggests Pepino contains a substantially more active compound profile than the standard nutritional database entries typically suggest. The practical reality of using Pepino today depends almost entirely on climate. For someone living in USDA zones 10 or 11, the southern tip of Florida, the southern California coast, Hawaii, or comparable subtropical regions, Pepino is one of the most rewarding perennial fruits available. A single plant established in a sunny location will produce fruit continuously across multiple seasons each year. The plant grows as a small evergreen shrub, roughly 2 to 4 feet tall, with sprawling branches that benefit from light staking. Propagation is straightforward but specific. Take cuttings from healthy mature plants in spring or early summer, 6-inch sections from semi-hardwood branches. Remove the lower leaves, dip in rooting hormone if available, and plant in well-draining seed starting mix. Cuttings typically root within 4 to 6 weeks and can be transplanted to permanent locations once they show vigorous new growth. Avoid starting from seed if possible. Seed-grown plants produce unpredictable fruit characteristics and may take longer to reach productive maturity. If you must start from seed, purchase from reputable sources and expect significant variation in fruit quality. For cultivation, provide full sun to light afternoon shade in hot climates, well-draining soil with moderate fertility, consistent moisture without waterlogging, protection from strong winds, which can damage the relatively soft branches. Light pruning to maintain plant shape and encourage new fruiting wood. The plant begins producing fruit roughly 6 to 8 months after rooting, with most cultivars reaching peak production in the second and third years. Mature plants, in optimal conditions, produce between 50 and 100 fruits per year, distributed across multiple flowering and fruiting waves. For colder climate gardeners, Pepino can be grown as an annual outdoor crop in zones 7 to 9, planted from cuttings in late spring after frost, producing fruit through summer and early autumn, and either harvested out completely before first frost or moved indoors as a houseplant for winter survival. A south-facing window with adequate light will sustain a mature Pepino plant indoors through northern winters, though indoor production is typically lower than outdoor. For harvest, pick fruits when the skin is turned cream-colored with darkened purple stripes and the fruit yields slightly to gentle pressure. Unripe Pepino has a mild cucumber-like flavor and can be eaten in salads or used like an unripe cucumber. Fully ripe Pepino has a sweeter melon-like flavor and is typically eaten fresh as dessert fruit or combined with other tropical fruits and salads. The skin is thin and edible but slightly bitter, so most cooks peel the fruit before serving. The seeds are small, clustered loosely in the central cavity, and edible. Storage is the one area where Pepino does not compete with the long-storing crops we have covered in previous videos. Fresh ripe fruit keeps for 1 to 3 weeks under refrigeration. Unripe fruit will continue to ripen at room temperature over several days to a week. There is no traditional long storage preparation for Pepino. The fruit is used fresh or processed into juice, sorbet, or short-term jam preparations. This is why my honest title for this video includes year-round production, rather than the longer storage claim that fits chayote better than it fits Pepino. There are 2 practical cautions worth knowing. First, Pepino is in the nightshade family. For the small percentage of people with documented nightshade sensitivities, typically associated with autoimmune conditions where avoiding tomato, potato, eggplant, and pepper provides symptomatic improvement, Pepino should also be avoided. The compounds responsible for nightshade sensitivity reactions appear at similar levels in Pepino as in other Solanaceae fruits. Second, unripe Pepino contains higher levels of solanine and related glycoalkaloids than ripe fruit. These are the same compounds found in green potato skins and unripe tomatoes. Eating large amounts of green unripe Pepino can produce digestive distress. Stick to fully ripe fruit or use unripe Pepino only as a cooked ingredient, similar to how unripe green tomatoes are used in Southern American cuisine. For purchase rather than home cultivation, Pepino is occasionally available at specialty grocery stores in major American cities with strong Hispanic immigrant populations, particularly stores serving Peruvian, Ecuadorian, or Colombian communities. Online specialty produce retailers ship Pepino seasonally when supply is available. The fruit typically retails between $3 and $8 per pound, which reflects its limited cultivation and the labor-intensive harvest process. For seeds and cutting material, Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds and a small number of specialty native plant suppliers sell Pepino seeds in small quantities. The cuttings, when available, typically come from specialty fruit tree nurseries in California, Florida, and Hawaii. What you have when you grow Pepino in a frost-free climate or as a seasonal annual in colder regions is one of the oldest cultivated fruits in the Western Hemisphere. A plant that fed Andean civilizations for 2,000 years before European contact erased the global commercial infrastructure that might have brought it to broader attention. The plant is still here. The growing tradition is still preserved across millions of South American households. The only thing that has changed is whether anyone north of Peru remembers to ask for it. If you live in frost-free coastal California, southern Florida, or Hawaii, pepino is one of the most rewarding perennial fruits you can plant. For colder climates, the annual or greenhouse approach gives you access to the fruit that fed pre-Inca Peru 2,000 years before the supermarket existed. Next week, a leafy vegetable that grows wild in salt marshes along the entire American coastline, contains more iodine than seaweed, and was a primary food source for coastal indigenous communities across Florida, the Gulf Coast, and the Pacific Northwest before the rise of industrial salt processing made it irrelevant. Subscribe so you do not miss it.